Hey, Jay, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman in the hallway. You want to move into the conference room, please? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everybody here tonight. This is a rare occasion to have both council and commission together. Jim, do you?
Well, we have the jail projects on the agenda with joint session with the Gibson County Council. I did hand out to you a memo from Baker Tilly today concerning assumed project funding. I think we started off there. Is Matt Erkley on?
He is on the phone.
So I asked Matt Erkley to join us to answer any questions. There were some questions about how much the jail tax would generate, so I just wanted to clear that up first as we start our discussions concerning the jail project. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you if you don't mind.
That's fine.
And
Can everyone hear me?
I've handed out your the document you emailed me this afternoon. I've handed it out to everybody.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to try. Oh, never mind. All right. Well, thanks. Good evening, everyone. Jim and I had some conversations with Rick Connor this week, shaping the two scenarios that you see before you. Just to run through them. Scenario one, we were asked the question of what would a financing look like, or what could it be sized at if the county were to utilize only the correctional and rehab facilities local income tax revenues. So that's what scenario one shows. And on page 2, you'll see the sources and uses of funds for that scenario. And want to call your attention really to the top line item, and that's the proceeds available for the project. And that represents the total non-financing costs that could be supported by this scenario. So that's $24,665,000. You'll see below that there are separate line items for capitalized interest, which is the interest during construction, the underwriter's discount, which is the fees that the underwriting financial institution takes, and then the allowance for bond issuance costs and contingencies. Those are the other fees that are associated with the financing itself. So those three line items represent the financing costs. The 24.6 could be utilized to fund site acquisition, site development, design and construction, as well as other hard costs, even equipping the facility. Now, to fund the project, the total estimated project costs are almost $26 million. We're estimating that the correctional and rehab lit-only revenue stream could support a bond issue of $20.6 million. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. And then we're also assuming that the correctional and rehab facilities lit that's collected in 2020, 2021, and 2022, which would be the time period before any bond payments would be due. So that cash would be available to be used for project costs. Moving on, page 3 is an illustrative amortization of the financing, but I really want to focus on page 4, which is a comparison of that estimated revenue stream for the correctional and rehab facilities lit to the illustrative lease rental payments that are associated with the bond. a few things I want to call attention to. The estimated correctional and rehab facilities lit revenue stream that we've included here, we are basing it on a couple different things. One, we have the 2020 certified amount. For 2021, it's based on the estimated amount as provided by the DLGF. They released those in September. And you will notice that the estimate for 2021 is higher than 2020. And then what we've assumed is that it actually dips in 22 and 23. And I know that I covered this when I presented the comprehensive financial plan. But with the timing of income tax collections, the governor's executive orders earlier this year that extended the filing deadline for income taxes to July, he also extended the calculation period for 2021 local income tax distributions so that it's actually 14 months instead of the typical 12 months. A typical year, say 2020, the 2020 income tax distributions were based on tax returns processed between July 1 of 2018 and June 30th of 2019. For 2021 income tax distributions to local governments, it's based on income tax returns processed between July 1 of 2019 and August 31st of 2020. So there was an extra 2 months in there. And that extra 2 months came at the expense of the 2022 collection cycle, which is going to be based on 10 months, September 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. We're still working through some data that we've been provided by the Department of Revenue to make a more scientific determination of what that impact is going to be. We've taken a conservative approach in this analysis and assumed that the hit in 2022 would be a 10% reduction compared to 2020 certified revenues, and that there would be some level of recovery for 2023, but there would still be some residual effects of COVID. Again, a conservative assumption. And then we assume that for 24 and beyond, you're back up to your 2020 certified levels. And again, being conservative, not assuming any growth from that point. You'll see that we have 20, 21, and 22. There are no lease rental payments being made. This is because in Indiana, you can't make lease payments on a lease bond until a facility is completed and ready for occupancy. So this represents the construction period where interest would be paid from bond proceeds. And then we have the estimated revenues remaining for those first 3 years that would be moved back into the project. For the remaining years, there's a level of coverage there. We've assumed that there would be $1.25 of revenues for every dollar of lease rental payments. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One is to provide some cushion so that you could absorb reductions in the correctional and rehab facilities lit and still have sufficient revenues to make the lease payments. And two, something that we've talked about before, we're assuming that these bonds will be payable from the correctional and rehab lit, but they'll carry what we call property tax backup. And the property tax backup is for purely marketing purposes. In Indiana municipal bonds, the bond market looks at property taxes as the gold standard for credit. And generally, you'll receive a better rating from ratings agencies with a property tax security involved, and you will get more competitive interest rates when you have a property tax security involved. And so that 25% of coverage helps make the finding, there's a legal finding required, that the property tax backup is just that. It's a backup. It's only there for marketing purposes, and there's no intent or reasonable expectation that the property taxes would actually ever be needed to make those payments. And that's important because if you were to expect to use property taxes to make bond payments, then you would be subject to the rules of a property tax bond issue, which would include potential referendum or petition remonstrance. It's a more involved process. So that coverage provides security from a financial standpoint and from a legal standpoint for the use of that property tax backup. Excuse me, I'll take a drink of water. Now, scenario 2, which begins on page 5, it is based on the assumption that the project would be funded from that correctional and rehab facilities, local income tax, and also from economic development lit revenues. I believe it's been previously discussed that a certain amount of economic development lit or edit would be made available for this project in the amount of $500,000 a year from 21 through 25. And then in 26, which also corresponds with the expiration of the courthouse renovation loan, that amount would be increased to $550,000. So again, we're assuming a bond that would be issued payable from these sources, but carry a property tax backup. The proceeds available for the project, we're assuming that there's approximately $36.5 million of revenues available to fund the project costs, and that's about $30.2 million from a bond issue payable from those sources, and approximately $6.3 million from the cash, again, collected during the construction period before the payments start on the bonds. And that $36.5 million would provide about $34.3 million for construction costs. And then we also have the allowances built in for the costs of the financing. And then to move on to page 7, it reads, sorry.
Can I interrupt a minute? The
Sure.
commissioners have decided to give more edit money out of, but what the holdup is, we're wanting to give $350,000 more a year for the 20 years. But the state of Indiana now says that they're going to drop the amount of edit money in 2021, starting in January. But it has not been determined yet how much that's going to affect our edit. They're trying, we found out today that they are trying to finalize this and send out to the county how much of a drop you're going to have, and they're hoping to have that by the last day of November. So
Okay.
after the last day of November, we should know how much we're going to receive in 2021 and then on, so we'll be able to make sure that we're not giving a deficit.
Well, once that information is available, yeah, if you could please share that, we can definitely update our analysis to reflect any of those changes and assumptions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Well, again, this analysis is based on these specific assumptions, but just to kind of round it out, on page 7, it lays out similarly to the earlier coverage schedule. A couple differences I want to point out. We've included the economic development lit. You'll notice that the revenue coverage is much lower. And that's because we've made the assumption that, and this gets into more of a financial and legal nuance than anything, we wouldn't anticipate that the contributions be any different than what's been represented, but we're leveraging more of the revenue stream because we assume that coverage that I talked about before could be provided by the rest of the edit revenue stream, so you could leverage closer to the full amount of what's been pledged. We're still allowing a little bit of cushion, so you wouldn't go beyond what you've already committed, but you could still go a little bit lower and make that reasonableness finding. So I wanted to just make sure I mentioned that that's the reason why the revenue coverage is a little bit lower in this scenario. But as you see, it lays out much the same as what you saw in the correctional and rehab facilities lit scenario only. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Matt, Jim McDonald, can you just for this old country boy, can you give us a summary of what you just told us? I mean, option 1 and option 2. What does option
Sure.
1 really tell us? And when you're talking about, correctional rehabilitative facilities lit, you're talking about the jail tax, is that right?
Correct. Yeah, you could refer to it as just the jail tax. It's the special income tax that the county imposed last year. You're in your first year of collection. And really, yeah, to break it down to brass tacks, Jim and everyone else, scenario one, where you're looking at just using that jail tax, you could raise we'll call it $26 million, of which 24,665,000 estimated would be available for project costs. And again, that project cost represents site acquisition, site development, design, construction, equipping. That's the amount that you would have for the project itself, everything but the financing cost. Scenario two, when you layer in the edit contribution, the $500,000 raising to $550,000 in 2026, we're estimating about $36.5 million would be available in total, and that translates to $34,365,000 for project costs, so everything but the financing cost.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for him?
Yeah, have we discussed anything about going down to a smaller jail?
Well, I think that's why we have Rick Connor here. That's not Matt Everly. He's just finance guy. If you got any finance questions, this is the guy to ask right here. What's the availability of funds, structure of funds, and all that stuff. This is the guy.
Hey, Matt. Jeremy Overton here, if you don't recognize my voice. The interest rates, obviously we're at a historic time as far as rates. What are these kinds of bonds? Are they typically some sort of floating rate or they're locking for a certain number of years? I mean, how realistic do you think these interest rates are? And what would be the impact of, say, a 0.5% or a % increase in those rates?
Sure, Jeremy, to answer your last question first, I'll have to punt and do the calculations of what a 0.5% bump would do. We can certainly do that if this group would like that for reference, and just kind of quantify what that impact would be. So I'm just writing a note to myself. All right, and then the rest of it. Now, these bonds, what we would anticipate, and this is kind of the standard for these types of bonds, is that they will be priced at a fixed interest rate. Now, you'll look at the amortization schedules where you see interest rates ranging from 0.85% up to 3.2%. And that's because municipal bonds are priced on a yield curve, typically. And so what you're seeing is you're pricing those as individual maturities that different investors are going to buy. And so the people who are buying the bonds that are maturing in 2041 want a higher return or a higher rate than the folks who are buying the bonds that mature after just 3 years. So they'll get priced on a yield curve typically. And despite showing as being different rates, those would all be locked in at issuance. We wouldn't suggest taking this out as and offering these as a variable rate deal because of the interest rate risk that could be involved on the long term. So we typically take these as fixed rate bonds, and they get priced on a yield curve like this. I think your other question, Jeremy, if I heard it correctly, was how conservative are we in our assumptions? As you correctly pointed out, we're at near record lows in terms of interest rates. Great if you're borrowing money, not great if you're looking to invest money. But we do, because we're assuming that these bonds would sell in the first quarter of next year, in March. There's certainly nothing on the horizon that indicates significant changes in interest rates between now and then, but we do put some cushion into these numbers. Certainly if we sold these bonds tomorrow, we would expect better interest rates than what's indicated here, but we're not selling these bonds tomorrow. So we put some cushion in there to allow for fluctuations that could happen here in the next 4 months, 5 months. that could result in an increase in interest rates. And this is something that, as we progress, I'm continually talking with our director of pricing, who's, in the market every day, watching deals that we're doing and deals that other communities are doing. So as we provide updated financing scenarios, as we advance through this process, you likely will see some changes in these interest rate assumptions because they'll be based on more up-to-date information at that time than what we have now. I wouldn't be using this information in February when we're having this conversation because things will have changed. So we'll be watching that, but to really answer your question, we do have some cushion built into this to allow for fluctuations that are likely going to happen between now and March of 2021.
You have a coverage, Jim McDonald, you have a coverage in there of 125%. And that coverage is to ensure that you have enough for the payment for the bond. Is that correct?
That's correct, Jim. And that coverage is on kind of the other end. That's on the revenue side. That's allowing for the fluctuations that'll happen in the future on the revenue, providing some downside protection there. And on the interest rates, we have coverage on the upside where we're conservative on the high side of the interest rate assumptions.
Anything else for Matt?
Go ahead.
Rick?
Jim, this is Rick Connor. Matt, could you discuss just a little bit of what we talked about this morning, if you were to try to enhance the coverage or the backup with edit on option one, what the result would be?
Sure. Let me pull up the right analysis so that way I'm using the right numbers. And conceptually, what Rick's referring to is on that scenario one, the 125% coverage that we were just talking about, that's required not only to provide financial protection to the county, but also so you can make that reasonableness determination that the property tax backup is a backup, that there's not an expectation that the property tax backup would be used. Now, what you could do if you wanted to get the most leverage out of your jail tax and get 100% coverage on that rather than 125, you could layer in your edit as a backup to the jail tax and then have the property taxes fall behind that. So if you had a reduction in the edit or in the jail tax, that would fall on the edit before it would fall on the property taxes. And the net effect of that would be about a $5 million larger bond issue that you could get payable just from, that would still just be using the jail tax, but there would be that layer of protection where edit would be drawn upon before property taxes. And you could still make that reasonableness finding that the property taxes are purely a backup. Now that increases the odds that, if there's a drop in the jail tax, you would have to use the edit, but that still gives you the benefits of the property tax backup and allows a bigger financing size from the jail tax. And again, that net effect it's a little under $5 million based on current estimates. One thing to contemplate with that is that this would be considered an obligation of the edit, and it would have to be taken into account if the county at some point in the future wanted to issue an edit bond. They would, you'd have to be in compliance with the covenants of the jail bond before you issued a bond payable from edit. It's something, you do that communities do that all the time. They have multiple bonds out there payable from similar revenue sources, but it would just be a layer of complication and a limiting factor in the sizing of any future edit bonds if the county chose to go down that path.
It's kind of a way that you could get the maximum out of that jail tax. $5 million is a pretty good bump. And then one last question was, the county has some sort of debt on, was it the courthouse project, which was a TIF bond?
Go ahead.
The courthouse renovation financing is payable from edit, and that is about $150,000, $160,000 a year, and that expires after 2025.
Let's hopefully, if the commissioners pledged $500,000 like is scenario 2, when you get to 2025, then it's only $350,000.
So again, we have set now that, you know, the funding is, 25, you know, on scenario 1 is 25,996,000. That's the usable, fund the jail tax on.
Yeah.
And that, do we all accept that figure?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, again, then the second scenario with the edit, 36,541, and that's without us allocating another.
Yeah.
Fitzgerald's checking that. Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, we know, for sure what the state's gonna do, and what it is.
But now,
I would respectfully ask the commissioners how they would have reacted that we cut their edit budget by $500,000 a year for the term that they have served on the commission.
I didn't understand this.
We're obligating that $500,000, we talked about obligating that $500,000, I'm just curious thoughts how you all would have felt, with regard to the council, if you were obligated, you know, taking $500,000 out of that budget, what would have suffered over the last 5 years?
Paving,
I didn't understand.
you know, several things, and nobody wants to do it, you know, we don't have any choice, we feel like paving would be one. Where did we utilize it? Paving is.
Well, that, all edit funds is originally for road, improvements, but, we, through the years, they have taken money out of edit, the council has asked to take money out of edit. Let's use the courthouse renovation, that was before I came on. And, they dedicated $160,000, I think, did that come out one time or 2 times?
One.
Okay, so that was for a 20-year bond or 30-year bond, I don't know it now. But, that's the type of thing, this paid for employees' salaries, this paid for insurance for employees. So through the years, they've all had problems.
Very little on employee salary.
Right.
Very.
But
Almost.
it's paid for everything that the county pays through the years when the council was short of money. So this is just another, way of, the council not going out and getting a loan.
Well, I think Matt's giving you some scenarios where you can leverage the edit, and use your, coverage. And basically, you're just using the edit for a backup. Because I think everybody agrees, we don't want to get into the property tax at all. But I think this analysis has given us some insight as to how much money is available in different scenarios. Give you some type of platform to work on when you size your jail, I guess. That's fair. Yeah.
So clarification,
So I have Rick Connor here from Structure Point, if you have any questions to him as well. Yeah.
so clarification on the utilization of the edit funds as backup in that situation there. Does that mean you're not actually utilizing it to make a payment? It's just you reserve X amount within that edit budget that cannot be spent. It sits there in the event that the jail tax does not meet the obligation or the expected revenue.
Yeah.
So if you pledge that you're gonna hold in reserve $300,000 of edit, that would never be spent unless the jail tax did not meet the bond payment, is that?
Can I add something? What kind of risk to the county, your upgrade of roads and all their risk, that edit money is supposed to be used for, but it won't be there. I mean, that's a lot of money at $500,000.
when you say it's supposed to be used, that actually is what we've used a lot of it for, but it's not earmarked for this.
I know, but that $500,000 will take a lot away from anything else.
Well, we don't, we don't need one of them to go to jail, we're just in a position where we have a choice.
And I would just provide one clarification on that backup question, is that when you're kind of making the determination each year of whether or not that edit would actually be required. So in August, in a normal year, when you get your upcoming year's income tax estimates, you would look at the jail estimate, and then you get the certified amount in November. But you'd look at that estimate and say, okay, do we have enough coming up this coming year to make the full debt payment? And if you do, that edit that you would normally hold in reserve for that upcoming year can be spent on other projects. You're making that determination on kind of a rolling basis. Whereas if you were looking in August and then, it's certification and say, oh, we're $250,000 short on the jail lit, then you would need, on the jail tax, then you would need $250,000 of edit to plug the gap to make the payment. So you would have access to it. You're just making the determination of how much access you'll have at budget time each year when you're getting the upcoming year's income tax distribution information.
That clears it up a lot, thank you, Rick.
Thank you. Yeah. So do we want to ask the question of what can we do
Well,
with?
Rick, you're here, we had some discussions at the prior council meeting concerning the size of the jail. And I think it's pretty well the consensus, and I won't speak for anyone. The 288 bed is just, I think, too far out of reach, too hard to swallow. So I think the council and I don't know who I'm speaking to here, but I guess I'll just talk. Have you ran any numbers on a 196 bed facility and what that would be just to build the jail itself? And then could you design it in such a way to have add-ons, to add on the sheriff's department and add on community corrections?
Yeah, I can answer all of those questions.
Okay.
Maybe just first of all, trying to get comfortable with the idea of, instead of doing what we thought was a 20-year solution, which was 288 beds, scaling back to a 10-year solution of 196 beds. What does that really, help me understand what that means. What it means, if you look at 2019, you had 128 customers in the jail, not community corrections. I mean, we might have had jail prisoners in community corrections, but only jail prisoners is what I'm counting. We had an average daily of 128 prisoners. So if you took that 128 and you just added 10 years of growth at 3%, okay, pretty small number, and then also provided that 20% margin, remember that the state is saying that you have to have in there, you have to have 20% free space. That about gets you to that 196. So it's building in the margin that they're asking us to have. So it's more or less relieving the current overcrowding. And then secondly, putting something in there for growth. And the growth, that 3% part, that's about a third. So you're basically growing by 30% capacity. So 196 gives you a third, 35% growth, and makes it legal, I guess, from a safety standpoint. So if you were to build the 196 bed jail plus community corrections plus the new sheriff's office, all on a greenfield site, that number is what we presented to the jail committee that day, and the same thing that we presented to this council here, it seems like a month ago or whatever. That was 34.4, which is right at what he's saying for option 2. It's coincidence that it's actually that number. If you were to say, well, what would be the minimum you could do? Well, the minimum would be to just build the jail out there. So no sheriff's office, no community corrections. We could design it so that those things could be added in the future. But we wouldn't, matter of fact, we could even design it so that those things could be bid as alternates. And if you got a really, really good bidding environment, maybe you could build one of those, or maybe even both of them on them. So the very bottom would be just building the jail itself. So it's the jail administration, booking, medical, all the stuff that you need, Sally Port, and all the administrative part, plus the incarceration area. That would end up being 29.2. Which is also an interesting number because that's the same number if you did that edit backup on just the jail tax, you're right at that 29 million. So you could do that without any edit. You just have to use the backup. Now, if you wanted to add community corrections, that's roughly 2.3. If you wanted to add the sheriff's office, that's roughly 5.3. So 29 to do the Bear Jail, an extra 2.3 to add on community corrections, an extra 5.3 to add on the sheriff's office, and that gets you to that 34.4. Is that kind of clear?
So the sheriff's office is an additional 5 on top of the 2, on top of the 29?
So it's an additional 5 on top of the 29, and community corrections is an extra 2 on top of those 2, and that's what gets you to 34. Take 29.2 plus 2.3 for community corrections, plus 5.3 for the sheriff's office.
You're a little high.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not right.
It's 36, was that like 36.8?
That's almost 37 million.
Yeah.
Well, hold on here a minute. You're right.
I think your numbers are right, but Rick, when you did the calculation, yeah.
Right,
Total counted one of them.
right.
So let me ask you this, so you had the 34.4 million option, I got that, that's, sheriff, jail, and community corrections. Then you said, I think you said 31.7, that's with no community corrections, just the sheriff's? I think you flip-flopped those when you explained it the second time.
I truly misspoke.
But I mean, I'm just saying, I just want to get it right though. Is it jail and sheriff's office that would be coming in around 31.7 million?
No, I misspoke. The 36, the 196 bed jail plus the sheriff's office plus community corrections is 36.7, not 34.4.
So 29.2 for the jail, 196 bed jail, 2.3 for community correction, and another 5.2, 5.3 for sheriff's department office.
That should get you to 36.7.
Yeah.
I don't think the sheriff's department and the jail should be separate.
And what effect would that have on staffing if they were separated?
Sheriff's deputy shouldn't be running the jail.
Pardon?
Sheriff's deputy shouldn't be running the jail.
We have, or I don't know if that's.
No, but I run the jail. You do?
Rick, does that include, so tell us what that includes, that number you just gave us. Is that all in, that includes your fees?
Yes. Includes my fees. It includes equipment like for the kitchen, beds, whatever furniture you might need. Shouldn't need too much. It includes the purchase of land at right now we're carrying the number of 350,000. It includes the site costs, what it costs to turn up the dirt and develop, build a retention pond, what have you. It's everything. and it has a 10% contingency included in it. So at this level of planning, it's pretty customary to put a contingency on there. I think where I got confused is I was just in a meeting this morning, and they were talking about the bids that they received on the courthouse project. That's not a jail, but it's similar in magnitude in Michigan City. And those prices came in 20% below what the estimate was. So I'm sitting here thinking, what I would really do if you can live with 196 beds, what I would do is I would design the 196 bed jail, and then I would have 2 ad alternates, one for community corrections and one for the sheriff's office. And I bet you're going to fit right within that option too. And if you didn't, well, then defer. You'll be in compliance with the court, because all the court's telling you to do is to go to jail. But I agree with the sheriff, thinking of how you would operate this darn thing, you know, in 2 different locations, that's going to cost money, and you don't have to have too many extra staff positions if you multiply them out for what they cost you, and then multiply it times forever, and it becomes a pretty big operational number. The beauty of the 196 bed jail that we've got laid out is that your staffing costs will not change for 10 years. I mean, they'll go up with inflation, but the positions will not change. And that's something that, you know, we've been kind of living with.
And I assume if it's on the green side, that then in 10 years, if you needed to expand,
We would design it so that it could be expanded. You wouldn't pay any extra for that. We just have a knockout wall so that it could be expanded in the future to however many beds you thought you needed.
I'll ask Rick a question here if I could.
Yeah,
Rick, I just want to know, well, actually, I'll start with the sheriff and just ask. So ideally, you'd like to see this facility have 3 components to it, and that is the jail, the dispatch, and there's one other I'll let you there too on. Jail, dispatch, and sheriff's office. And the sheriff's office. So you want your office, you want all 3 of those to be centralized and stock it out. That makes sense to me. And then the real question I was going to ask you was, I was looking at the A&E cost for this at 10%. Is that kind of the norm for the state?
It's not 10%.
Okay, I was just looking at the A&E there, it's listed at, one of your numbers there was 10% in the contract I was looking at.
I don't know what you were looking at, but it's not 10%.
What is the percentage on the architectural and engineering
For
part?
basic services, it's 7.5%.
7.5%. And so what you're telling the commissioners and the council at this point is, we've got these 2 options financially to look at, and you're saying that, really your bottom dollar coming in on this project, to give the sheriff what he wants, is gonna be in the neighborhood of about 36 million, is that correct?
I think to give him everything that he wants, that's true.
Okay.
You know, with what everybody's appetite is. I mean, I have to tell you that when we design a facility, we usually design it for 20 years of life. And that's usually because they're 20-year bonds. I mean, so for me to say, I recommend you guys build a 196 bed jail, you're not gonna have me say that. But I think it's the right thing to do, given your financial situation and where you guys are right now. I think it's easily achievable. And I believe that you can add on to it if you have to. That becomes a problem for another day. But what you find in these things is that the operational costs, they're darn near as much as the capital costs. I mean, I know we're talking about $36 million, but we're spreading it over 20 years. So it's 2,500 or you know, was it 1,800 a month on the one bond and then another 500,000? So the operational cost, though, when you talk about staffing, is absolutely crazy, and that's why we got to get out of that old jail and build something that you can get down to.
One of good and read about some of the new jail construction and architectural designs going into it. They're trying to minimize the amount of employee footprint. So if we could maintain the integrity of the amount of employees we have right now, I think that'd be great. But one thing I'm adamant about is giving the sheriff what he wants. And so, as someone who's here speaking for the taxpayers, I want to be able to give the sheriff what he wants, but I also want to make sure when I do take office that we get the most that we can for the taxpayer dollars. So sheriff, he's at the top of my list. I want to make sure we take care of him because he knows the ins and outs of that facility and he knows his people. But we also got at the same time be balancing, finding that pendulum, if you will, balancing that pendulum, making sure we take care of our taxpayers. I did a little comparison shopping and looked at Posey County project. Came in at 16.4 million. It was a 200-bed facility. They used the pod development like you mentioned in your address earlier. So they have the room or, the ability to expand later on too. So I guess going forward, what I want to make clear to everyone involved in this is it makes me no difference the direction we go as long as we're taking care of the sheriff and taking care of our taxpayers.
I think the important thing when you compare projects, and we do the same thing that you're trying to do all the time. It's a balance then of how many square feet of sheriff's office space do we have? How many community corrections beds do we have? What's the complexion of cells within the jail? Can we do more dormitories and less individual cells, which kind of becomes a preference of the sheriff and what his experience has been with his customers, right? So every jail's a little bit different. And
I think we still need to have some flexibility on that too, because I want the sheriff to be able to, if he needs to isolate or needs a cell or multiple cells, I want him to have that flexibility. And then also, like I said, we're gonna need the bunks too. We're gonna need areas where he can double up on people that are, people that he can count on getting along with each other and whatnot. So I do think we do need to have some flexibility in our floor plan and make sure we get the sheriff what he wants on the floor plan too.
I welcome the opportunity to lay out the plan with you and show you the different types of spaces that are in there and get some input.
Whenever you mentioned Posey County, that wasn't, I don't believe that was counting their renovation. Their current building was a lot more modern than ours, right?
The way I understand it, and you may correct me later on, but
I'm not sure.
the way I understand it, it was an inside-out type project. They actually did some renovation and then they expanded some pods too. So it was more of an inside-out. There was new construction and existing remodeling, existing construction remodeled. But at the end of the day, they ended up ballpark figure right there at around 16.4 million. What they ended up at. Now, granted, you could say, well, Fleetwood, you're a little dated on that because your square footage construction costs have gone up from $300 when that was built now $400. I did a little homework on that too. So costs do go up as we know in construction. But even given that increase, we may still see I don't know what your project came in on this, Rick, but we may see 425 on this project. $425 per square foot.
I don't think that the way we've been doing business in county, they're hungry, and that we've actually been coming in hungry. Because the contractors, I was told that they've really been coming in hungry. Now, I can't guarantee that.
That's right.
I think the jail part of the jail, where you have cells and that's the highest cost, I think you'll see $400 type figures. But in the sheriff's office, perhaps even community corrections, you'll see lower numbers. And I do think it's a really good competitive market. And then you kind of got to look at it. Posey was kind of an addition. There was a certain amount of project that was already there. For example, if you look at you look at the 196 bed option, if you divide out the beds and the cost and all that kind of thing, you're into $120,000 a bed, okay? The 92 bed addition that we might put on there to, in the future, $55,000 a bed. So, you know, it's just, you gotta just sit down and look at what are you figuring, you know, they're all a little bit different. I agree with you that the thing that I hate the most about jails is they're not that flexible. Once you decide that you've got a block here that's gonna be 2-man cells, you spend a boatload of money to make it 2-man cells, it's awful hard to renovate it in the future. So we gotta be right, and that's why we've worked with the sheriff, and we pushed back on some of the spaces. I mean, he said, I want this, and we said, well, what do you think about that? And, you know, we're trying to put together the most efficient floor plan that we can, also thinking about the staffing. Because we could put together a floor plan that might work from a dollars and cents standpoint for construction, and then it might take more money to staff. And we wouldn't be getting anywhere. So that's why it is tedious to design these things, because you have to think about staffing. Yes, sir.
Rick, I want to get we almost need a whiteboard.
Well, I was thinking that too.
So the numbers you gave us today on 196 bed, and I'll say approximately 29.2 million on Greenfield. You said it would be another 2.3 roughly to do community corrections, which proposed at 31.7, and the sheriff's office included would be another 5 or so, which put us at 36.7 million.
Yes.
The contract that I guess Commissioner Bledsoe signed last week says the county's construction budget for the 288 bed project, including community corrections, is 38.5 million.
Yeah, that was a 288 bed jail. What we're talking about today is a 196 bed jail, so those numbers would all change.
So you're saying you could build a 288 bed jail for 38.5 million, and a 196 would still cost 36.7?
No, you remember I believe what you're looking at, the number in the contract is the construction cost. The numbers that I'm quoting you are total project costs. Because we're trying to match it up with funding.
There is funding now currently to process the green side. Is that, when I say that, I'm talking about we know so far it looks good.
Yeah.
But you need to do more work, but there is funds there for that at this time, correct?
Yes, sir. You've already approved that.
So the construction cost that's in the contract and is before your fees. Is that, what else is included in the total cost? Are your fees included in that?
In the total cost that I've been rattling off here, 36.7, 29.2, yes, that has our fees in it. It has the cost of land. It has the cost of equipment that goes in the jail. It has everything that you would need to match up with max funding.
That includes furniture and everything?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Open the door.
Well, when he says proceeds available for the project, I figured that's all we got. So I gotta account for all of that stuff. If you want to put a Christmas tree in there, I don't have that covered.
Did that include the contingency fee too?
Well, like I said, everything has 10% contingency on it. So, you know, we're not planning on using that contingency. So that's why I keep thinking that 36.7 is going to fit pretty good with his, what was he, 34.4 on his option 2. Because for 2 reasons. Here's why I think it's going to work. We're getting competitive bids these days, and if you bid this thing next year, I think you're going to be happy. A, and B, you got 10% contingency on it. If it was only 5% contingency, what's 5% of $35 million? That's 1.7 or something there, 1.8. So I've done it the other way, where I've lowballed the estimate just to make you guys all happy, and then it turns out to be higher when the bids come in. That doesn't work out very well. So I'm heavy, I know I'm heavy. But I don't want you to be surprised, and I think Matt does his work the same way.
So in the contract where it says 38.5 million for a 288 bed facility, 31.7 for, I know those numbers have changed, but those two numbers, construction budget, what does that, you just told us what all in is, but what's construction budget included?
Construction budget is the construction of the jail, I mean, all the things we just talked about, the jail, community corrections, and the sheriff's. So it's the buildings, construction of the buildings, and it is, construction of the site.
So what's missing in that compared to what you talked about, the total cost? And just,
What would be missing would be our fee and, the cost of land.
Bond issuance,
Financial.
soft cost.
Yeah,
What about parts of the work?
I don't have that covered. We'd have to cover that in the contingency.
Okay,
But
the part of the works, contract that we looked at was, this is the cost, so it was 120.
I think it would fit in there. Those usually aren't that expensive. I mean,
Gerald, did you read
$100,000
this?
is a lot of money, but compared to what we're talking about, it's not.
Did you get a chance to read this contract before you signed it?
Yeah.
If you wanna,
Because the contract says the county's construction, this is, I guess this is new, and 11/4/2020, so all the way back in, whenever we did this, August, September, we were very clear, I believe the council was, what our budget, where approximately we are. I think we got good news today when we look at it that way. It would have been nice to have that even sooner, rather than, I just had an estimate from Matt in the past. But I'm just curious. I just don't understand how going into an agreement of this size, you could have a contract that right in the first section, it says, well, these numbers really aren't exactly right. So they're showing, the county's construction budget for a 288 bed facility is 38.5 million. The county's construction budget for the 196, excluding community corrections, is $31.7 million. And then it shows your fees of 2.882, which I'm assuming that's based on the big number.
That is based upon a 288 bed jail, which at the time, we thought that's what we were doing. We were gonna, and there's another way to do this. We could design the full 288 bed jail and have three alternates. A 92 bed, addition, community corrections, and the sheriff's office. We could do it that way. I think since we did that, the commissioners have learned that the council's having trouble with 288. So,
But the question is what would your fee be for 196 bed?
it would
What
be,
you're getting at here.
it would be lower than what you have.
I'm assuming based on the math that his fee works out to be 7.5%. That doesn't include supplemental services, right?
It does not.
That's just yours.
I actually have that document that you're looking at revised. I didn't know how things were gonna go tonight, if you wanna look at it.
Revised since November 4th?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please, that'd be awesome.
I haven't done anything with it, I didn't know how to do it. So this is what those numbers could be. I only have one copy, I'm sorry.
I can get some other copies if you need.
I understand Matt accurately, correctly. The only way we could fund your project is if we dipped into edit funding also. Is that correct?
I think the only way you can fund the 196 bed project that we've been talking about is you have to dip into that $500,000 a year of edit that I didn't realize until we start getting a little more information that would jump down to $350,000 a year once that courthouse obligation burned off. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds. I mean, it's not good, but I don't see, I'll tell you, I don't see how you can build any less than 196 beds and get past the court. But I've never done one of these with the court before, so maybe I shouldn't say.
I think you'd still be obligated for the $500,000 of edit. It's just that once the courthouse renovation done, there'd be another 150,000 come back in available edit.
Yes, that's correct.
You're still gonna be on the hook for $500,000 for 27 years with edit to do scenario 2.
You're right.
It's just that after 2025, the courthouse bonds, that $150,000 a year obligation is no longer there.
But they also obligated another 50,000 out of that, so they're actually only going down 100,000 because after the courthouse bond expires, their 500,000 goes to 550,000. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, just moving forward, I mean, the county's got to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, edit was designed for economic development, and it's been used for a lot of other uses within the county as far as roads, sheriff's vehicles, ambulances. You know, there's a lot that has been utilized to enhance the life of Gibson County residents. So, you know, before we jump on this idea that we're willing to support $500,000 of future edit funds for 27 years, you have to realize how you're going to make up for those other shortfalls that it has been providing for. So,
Be 20 years, right?
yeah, 20 years. I don't remember. I might have said a different number.
It will not be, you know, again, we were offering even other funding if necessary, so there is funding out there other than the 500 or 550. It's not a choice we like. How many, what are we buying, one car with edit a year now, or is it, I think, isn't that right, Gerald? And we've been doing one ambulance.
It's been ambulances, there's been, you know, the equipment for the highway department. I mean, we've been $250,000 or something like that. It's been for equipment purchases, for upgrades, for trucks, and
They was able to, the last 2 years, buy out of their own money out of county garage. But their budget got cut $1 million plus out of it. And we don't know yet how much edit's gonna be. That's why we're holding off on this other until, the end of the month, when they're saying they will have a definite number for us. Depending on how much it is, the more it goes on.
As far as I'm concerned tonight, this is the best data that we've gotten since the process has started. This is a good, I think, restarting point. But there's a lot to digest here. Before we go into the design phase. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, just with having a contract that was signed pending our approval to move forward, I guess. A new amendment on the table in front of us. I don't know how everybody else feels, but I would feel a lot more comfortable going forward with the project if I could answer all of the questions that I asked of all of you guys today. Comfortable, you know what I mean? Like that we all have a better level of familiarity with what our construction, you know, signing something that that said we're in for a $38.5 million budget that doesn't include 2.882 million of basic services and 292,000 supplemental services. I just think to sign that agreement at a November 4th meeting, did your clerk of the works look at this contract, your gentleman that you were planning on hiring?
He has given us a contract in New York. Of course, we signed that contingent upon your funding, and trying to save money, by the way, of course, versus a.
So you have signed a contract with the clerk of the works?
We voted to.
All right, go ahead.
All right.
That's what I thought you said you had seen one.
Yes, well, we voted contingent, upon funding, but we do have a contract that we haven't signed yet. But again, we're trying to save $2 to $3 million, which again, $3 million is.
Did the council have a copy of the proposed contract from the clerk of the works?
Was it, I don't know, Jim.
I had it.
Yeah, Jim got what, I think, we had a read with it. We just-
I'd be going through this whole exercise if I was reading all on my back. So it's such a big project and having so many unknowns out there. Unknowns are one thing, but unknowns in a contract are tough.
Well, I don't want you to have any unknowns. So if you could help me understand what it is, you need more information on or answers to, man, I'll get it to you.
As I said, you've given us a lot to digest tonight. The numbers Matt Eckler gave us are helpful. I just don't think we're in a position to provide the commissioners with guidance tonight about what that actual budget is going to look like.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I come in here and, based on some of the numbers that we had been dwelling on was with the revenue that the jail tax would generate on an annual basis, we felt like we had about $19 million. That was it.
I had to bring, we just got a Thompson number.
Yeah.
I know.
So, I mean, I'm not like you, Jeremy. I mean, I don't know what to tell them tonight until we have a chance to kind of go through these numbers and go through it. So.
Yeah, I don't know where the 19 came from, because the very first day I talked to Matt Eckerly back in June, he ballparked it at 24.5 to me.
I'll tell you what, I mean, that was an eye opener for me today. That 19 million or just shy of 20 million number was the capitalized interest cost. If you look at that page 3 or whatever illustration, he wasn't factoring in that we don't start those payments on that bond for 4 years or 5 years. That's what I looked at. I'll definitely be talking to Matt some more to go deeper into those numbers. I want to spare everybody that.
With
You're doing it, but.
what you're thinking, and with what the state, we'll wait to see what the state tells us on that money. What about a meeting on December the 12th? That would be our morning meeting. Do you want to have it in the afternoon? Do you want?
You have to report this for
January. And that way, you can check out everything we use.
You just have to give them a status update, tell them what we're working on, there's no deadline or anything.
December 1st is a Tuesday.
January.
And we meet in the morning, and I thought
Yes,
maybe we
the
could
time,
meet the
yeah.
afternoon, if you got.
Another joint meeting?
Yeah.
What is it?
Do you feel like that's enough time?
The first,
Just saying that there's some design work done.
it's just a report meeting. That's all I gotta do is report.
You just said.
Don't make it more than that. You just gotta report. Don't make it more than it is. I know what's gonna happen here. You just have to report.
December 1.
Depends on what's on.
What time is good for you, council? Like I said, we'll be here in the morning, and our morning usually gets over about 10 o'clock.
Yeah, bring-
I would think that you would want to do it
Yeah, we have a drainage board meeting after that.
Because there's several of them that have obligations during the day, so it would probably need to be
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock,
That's okay.
because, you know, Jay's got obligations at school and Derek's got his thing.
4 o'clock, they can.
Can that work for you, Jared?
Again, that night, I'm not. I'm not coming in on that one.
If Mike wants to come January first, he's there by himself.
Is that all for Rick? Is that all for Matt?
That was a lot better.
Is that all for Matt Eckerly?
I don't have anything else.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
These other two issues, the council, CARES Act money. Derek, Jay.
Mr. President,
Yeah.
when I was talking to the president, the other issues are council issues, correct?
Yeah, the CARES Act money and the salary ordinance amendment, that's council.
What were you on the amendment?
Du Bois didn't get back with me, but in everything that I have read and in the contracts that Diane's office sent me, these are employees. She's telling them what hours, she's giving them direction, so they are not contracted employees. They're not carrying their own liability insurance. So I think that we need to put it on the salary ordinance under the CARES Act fund and show them as employees, and show, she gave me the rates for each
Excellent, thank you.
job. So,
And you can get all that added.
yeah, I think I can, but
Oh,
I'm
shoot.
sorry.
Jeremy, good job. Those are 3 different ones.
Oh, they're all. We
Yeah.
just have to make a motion to advertise it, right?
not,
For
no,
salary ordinance amendment.
salary ordinance amendment, we'll do it next time when I bring it. We
Yeah,
don't
we
have to
just have-
advertise
We
it.
had a lot of uncertainty around it, right? We'll put a couple of other items on the agenda in case they came out, yeah.
Yeah,
So we
and
can
I,
have that prep for the next meeting.
yes, and I have an independent contractor test if you'd like to read it. But I truly believe that they're employees.
And I mean, based on what we heard in the meeting, I mean, that's what it kind of sounded like. You know, things have changed over the years as far as used to have contract employees on the farm or whatever, and it was just an easier way to do things, you have to pay payroll taxes and all that. Based on how you described it, I mean, I think they need to be W-2 wage earners.
Yes,
And then they'll have to abide by the part-time hour limitations. And
yes.
The problem I have with that is that my nurse manager at the site, if you look at one of those, she will be working more than 3 days a week. And, she's the one running the site. There's 3 nurses, but she's the main nurse, and then she makes sure the nurses are covered. So it's her and 2 other girls, and they're working out their schedules between them. The clerical people I had in my staff that I did only work them up to the 23 hours. But it's gonna be that one nurse, but it's 1,040 hours per year, right?
Yeah, it is, you're right. But it doesn't matter, because if they go to do a test, they do look back and everything. So that's why they decided to have the 24 hours or less, because we could be responsible for benefits and stuff if we have a look back auditors.
So I guess that's where I don't know what I'm gonna do to,
I thought
that site.
you told me you could keep everybody under 24.
I can keep everybody, but the one, she's running that site,
Janet,
yes. And so I was thinking it was 1,040 per year. And so she's working just till December, and then she'll work till the end of June for next year.
oh, no, it's not a calendar year.
Okay,
I think it's,
in a 12-month period. We still
well, there's so
probably.
many hours per week or per pay that goes you into the benefits situation.
Yeah.
Is it 24? Because Debbie worked 23.
Yeah.
24, yeah. So I'm not real sure, if I can get two, I don't know if I can get two nurses to do that, and if she leaves, I'm gonna lose the other two nurses, and I'm gonna have a nurse call.
The only way that it can be done is if she supplies you with the contract saying that she will provide certain duties for that, and then you cannot tell her what day she's gonna be there and all that.
I mean, I explained that in that contract, but she's supposed to do the staffing out there.
I haven't seen a signed contract.
Yeah, I didn't have her sign it because I showed it to Mr. McDonald, but, you were kind of debating on which way to go. She has one that she'll sign, she's seen it. But I told her there wouldn't be any benefits, so I think it's the benefits that we're getting a little bit hung up on. And maybe she's the only one that's contracted, the other ones are not. That won't work.
I don't know, I mean, it's a pretty slippery slope for dealing with that. You know, it may be fine today that, yeah, I'm good, I don't need the benefits and all that, and then, oh,
Yeah,
I do.
right.
So, you know, I don't think we're very committed to anything until we know all the answers. If it can be a fully, a legitimate contract position, that's fine. But if it's not, we, too much liability on our part, being obligated for something we're not expecting.
So do you want me to go out there and manage the site and leave the health department? Because I can't leave both places.
You've got more on your plate than anybody that imagine. I don't know. I mean, I apologize and all that, but I mean, you have to be careful. I don't know.
I know.
I don't know how to tell you
Fix it.
to fix it, you know.
A contracted employee, she's gonna have to, it says, an independent business or trade, has a separate office or business, she doesn't. Has her own equipment needed to perform the services, she doesn't, we're providing it. Employs assistants, she's not employing anybody. So see, she's not gonna meet the qualifications of an independent contractor.
Okay, so I guess, Mr. McDonald, is there something we can write up that she would agree to not have benefits, or we cannot do that?
Not doing, but they'll meet those qualifications.
It, you know,
I didn't know how we could, I'm just asking how to do it.
you're,
I got a commissioners meeting in 15 minutes. I don't think
Yeah.
this is gonna get hashed
Yeah.
out right now.
I don't
So
think
we're
so.
gonna have to push this off so you guys get it figured out.
Years ago.
I mean, she's already paying them as employees.
Years ago, they signed a waiver. My
Yeah.
spouse has insurance, I don't need health insurance, and I'm willing to work 34, 35 hours. I don't know.
There's a big difference in that.
But legally, I don't think,
I don't think you can do that anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just that one employee that I'm gonna be tied up with, and the only other option is, Dana or I'll have to do the other hours. Which I can,
what's Jennifer doing
she's helping make the phone calls.
at your office rather than the testing site?
Well, she can go either place. I can have her, I got a phone out there for her to do it, but I've had her with us so far so that we can tell her how to do it. So I had to train her. We got a lot of off the wall questions.
Oh, I know. I don't even want to go there.
Yeah.
I don't want to be at your
So we
office.
try to train. But, I can have her go either place. If you prefer her to be out there, that's fine. It's just that we're an asset to her, then she can come and ask us questions if she's with us. But I have on several phones for her.
I was just wondering if it would lower the hours.
You know, I just, whenever we were looking for this position, I just don't want to lose my nurse, the main nurse, because she brought on the other two, and then put me losing all three.
Right.
That's my biggest concern.
And that's not what we're trying to do. We're just,
Yeah, I know.
we just have to be careful
How
on
we do.
that.
Did Sherry at one point have access to a consultant who could answer? Did you already talk to them? That's what they.
Not yet. I just got paperwork.
I brought it up to, at one of our state meetings, and because this is like an emergency situation, they said there may be emergency guidelines for that.
And there might be, I'll get a
You
hold
know,
of
so
them.
being, you know, we're in a state of emergency with the,
Yeah, I mean, you may be fine, that maybe that they can say that if they sign a waiver and all that, it's all
yeah,
fine
I
just
don't care
because
which way we go, I just,
of the situation that everybody's in and all that.
It is a temporary situation.
Right.
It will pass.
Well, you think it's temporary.
we hope.
Okay, all right.
So far, it's not been. I'll get a hold of the consultant and see what they think, see if they can give us something.
I'm okay with whichever way, and it's just, it's hard, I'm a little bit concerned
We'll find out.
about. Okay.
Yeah.
So then the other item that is on here was this CARES Act money. I don't remember.
Kind of went hand in hand, I think, didn't it?
So what was, I didn't know.
You guys looking at me for it.
Did you look at Mr. CARES?
I made the request before the last council meeting for that money, and that money was received Monday.
Okay.
It's here. The claims that I asked the council to approve, those have been submitted for payment. So Christie, I think she says we have a balance of what, 580, something like that. You guys, I think, set in place that if anybody in the entities that requires COVID assistance or money from the CARES to make that claim before your presence for approval, so it can be submitted, I guess that, is that right? Or ask for an additional appropriation?
You have to ask for an additional.
Prior to agreeing to the purchase price.
Yes.
Bring it before us. I think that's what we wanted to make sure.
But the only thing that it does require, just to help her and the state board of accounts and the county, is that claim, the document on the top, the COVID claim is attached to the invoice, so everybody knows it's COVID.
And it would be nice if we had a department by department wish list so that we could see what the total is of all these things.
I'll give
I
you
know
mine
Kevin,
right here.
Kevin at the health department had quite a few items that he talked to me about on the phone. I don't know if that message got conveyed to the.
At the last meeting, I think you guys had approved for our server and our phone system. Yeah, that's okay, don't worry about it. It's fine.
Oh, okay.
It's fine. So, I was just checking where that's at with this, because you all said to go ahead with that, but I don't know if the numbers got to you yet. There's, I had that appraisal from Parrish, and DCS is gonna be here tonight too, with that, related to that. Moving forward. But the server, I think we forwarded it to you. Here's, this is the only copy I have yet. But back when we was getting that $100,000 grant, it had the server on there. You remember that one? Okay. And then the phone system was like 5,200, but I don't know, they're gonna go up to 4 lines because our 2 lines are not enough right now. So so DCS is presenting some more on that tonight. So, but that was approved at the last meeting, correct?
So this will have to go through an additional appropriation, so you'll have to know exactly what your costs are gonna be.
And they're supposed
So
to be
that that can be, and tonight, well, unless you all plan on having another meeting, 10 days prior to the December 15th meeting, December 15th is the very last time we can ask for an addition. So this year might carry over into January if it's not.
But you clarified at the last meeting where this money is a reimbursement for services already incurred.
It's for payroll.
For payroll.
So this
And so
money,
we don't, there's
You don't
no
have to spend
urgency,
it.
let's spend it before the end of the
No,
year.
it went right back in the general.
Right,
So usually we gotta do it additional.
that's right.
Perfect.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be spent anytime in the near future.
Can we spend it on a 280 bed facility?
You are a little short.
Okay. Ask for more.
Okay, so what do I need to do to make sure the money's there for our server? And they're gonna be bringing us the totals, tonight at this meeting too. I think everybody's a little bit confused strange find.
All you need to do is bring a claim in here and ask for additional appropriation for that amount for it to be processed.
But that's why I give you that, like, that's the only one I had at that time.
The advertise.
That's all I have at this time.
They have to approve the advertise.
It was the, if you, and I sent it to you, we sent it to you in an email also, it was like the phone was 52
Mm-hmm.
and
I remember, we got an official.
but it may deviate from that a little bit because they're tweaking what BCS and Parish have worked together as you all had requested on what would be the best way to do the phone system. And so I don't know if Andrew's out there.
We could, absolutely.
Can we see if Andrew's out there?
We will not advertise. Yeah, yeah. No, very curious. What's the total?
The total for the
Service.
the server, the actual server on this was 12.5, but that didn't include the labor. Because that was from whenever we did the $100,000 one. So
It has to be advertised.
so it was 12.5, so I'm gonna say, I don't know how to, you know, I don't know how much labor goes into that. And then this is the phone system right here, and it was 53, but there may be some headsets. That's the phone one. The rest of ours, I think, was sent in. Here it is.
So, this is just, what's the issue? Why do we have to do it tonight if the money's there and it doesn't have to be spent on a certain time?
No, because they're just working on it. I just didn't know if I have to have it.
So I mean, rather than to rush into something like that.
Yeah, I agree.
If you address our December meeting and then if we need to do an additional and you'll have that, we'll advertise, but it may not happen until after the first of the year. And
That's fine.
yeah, I don't think we need to make any decisions tonight in a rush.
Okay. They were moving forward, we're trying to.
Right. The money's there and all that, and it doesn't have to be spent or obligated, so I would say we just let it ride till the next meeting.
Okay.
Unless I'm wrong.
I just wanted to clarify with the two remaining commissioners, that the agreement that was out there with Structure Point, based on 4 budgets, we want to make sure that you said that was contingent on council approval, and we're not approving a contract with 38.5 million of construction costs, that's before the architecture fees, so that's no good. And then there's a new one that you provided us tonight. Please don't rush to sign that one without getting that checked out and having somebody go through the contract. And then also, I guess, clerk of the works, we've asked real specifically to see that contract. It sounds like Commissioner Bottoms may have it, but I'd like to see that before there's a signature on it as well. And I think everybody else on the council agree, we want to see those.
No obligations until we all do it.
Just want to clarify.
You good?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the special meeting.
Thank you all for coming.
Aye.